A king, cursed to silence for 32 years, finally roars again, his voice like thunder because of her. She was his miracle, his Luna, his everything. He had the world at his feet, and then he threw it all away for fleeting pleasures, thinking she'd always forgive. Until one storm-soaked night, she looked him in the eyes and said the words that shattered their bond forever. I reject you.
Before we continue, kindly tell us where you are watching from, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because every day we have an amazing story that will make your day.
Chapter 1. The Silent King and the Light That Healed Him. The wind howled across the jagged peaks of the Silver Crest Mountains, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. In the heart of the ancient kingdom stood Blackthorn Palace, its obsidian towers piercing the night sky like claws. Inside the grand throne room, torches flickered, casting long shadows over kneeling wolves. At the center sat King Lysander Voss, the Lichen King. He was a vision carved from midnight and muscle, broad shoulders straining against a black tunic, raven hair falling wild over storm-gray eyes, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. Every pack in the realm feared him. One glance from those eyes could silence a riot. One tilt of his head could send warriors to their deaths. He ruled with absolute, terrifying power, but he had never spoken a word, not once in his 32 years. The curse was legend. His grandfather had betrayed the moon goddess's favored daughter, spilling sacred blood under a full moon. In retribution, the goddess stripped the voice from every firstborn son of the Voss line. Lysander bore it like a chain around his throat. He commanded through gestures, through written decrees, through the sheer force of his presence. Yet every roar he could not release echoed inside him, a hollow ache that gnawed deeper with each passing year. Tonight the court celebrated the winter solstice. Wolves laughed and drank, but their eyes kept drifting to their silent king. He sat motionless on the throne, fingers drumming once, sharp, impatient, on the armrest. The room quieted instantly. He was tired of the pity hidden behind their bows. Then the doors opened. She walked in. Seraphina Vale, not of royal blood, not even from a powerful pack. Just a healer's daughter from the borderlands, invited because her hands had saved half the northern battalion from silver poisoning the year before. She wore a simple gown the color of moonlit frost, silver threads catching the firelight. Her hair fell in soft auburn waves down her back, and her eyes, goddess, those eyes, were the green of deep forest pools, gentle and ancient all at once. The room seemed to breathe her in. Lysander's fingers stilled. He had never felt anything like it, a pull, deep in his chest, like an invisible thread tugging him forward. The mate bond. Everyone in the room felt the shift. Heads turned, whispers died. Seraphina's gaze found his across the hall, and she smiled, small, shy, radiant. He rose from the throne without thinking. The court parted like water. He stopped before her, towering, silent, heart hammering against his ribs. Seraphina wore white silk that clung to every curve, the fabric whispering against her skin as she walked toward him. Lysander waited at the altar, clad in black ceremonial robes open at the chest, revealing the hard planes of muscle and the ancient runes tattooed over his heart. When the high priestess bound their hands with silver cord and invoked the goddess's blessing, something shifted in the air. A warm wind swept through the open temple, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Lysander opened his mouth to seal the vow with the traditional words every alpha speaks to his Luna. Nothing had ever come out before. But this time, I take you, Seraphina Vale, as my mate, my Luna, my forever. His voice rolled out like thunder over the mountains, deep, rough, edged with raw power. The temple shook. Wolves outside howled in answer. The elders fell to their knees, weeping. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was blinding. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft at first, then deeper, hungrier. His arms crushed her to him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other sliding down the curve of her spine. The bond flared hot and bright between them, a living flame. That night, in the royal chambers, the curse shattered completely. Candles flickered. Silk sheets pooled on the floor. Lysander lifted her against him, mouth claiming hers with months of pent-up need. She gasped as he pressed her back to the cool stone wall, his large hands sliding under her thighs to lift her. The thin silk of her nightgown tore easily under impatient fingers. "Say it again," she breathed against his lips, legs wrapping around his waist. "Say my name." "Seraphina," he growled, voice rough with desire. The sound vibrated through her entire body. Mine. He carried her to the bed, laying her down like something sacred and sinful all at once. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, painting silver across her skin as he kissed his way down her throat, her collarbone, lower. Every touch was worship, slow, deliberate, reverent. When he finally sank into her, they both cried out. The bond sang between them, golden and fierce, binding soul to soul. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat-slick and breathless. He traced lazy circles on her bare back, lips brushing her temple. I was silent for 32 years, he murmured, voice still rough from disuse and pleasure. You gave me back my roar. She smiled against his chest, fingers tracing the runes over his heart. And you gave me a home. For the first time in his life, Lysander slept without nightmares. The kingdom rejoiced. Their king could speak. Their Luna was beloved, kind, wise, fierce in her quiet way. Pax came from across the realm to swear fealty, to hear the voice that had been legend. For 6 perfect months they were untouchable. He ruled with strength and fairness. She healed with gentle hands and sharp intellect. At night they burned for each other. Fierce, tender, insatiable. He would take her against the balcony rail under the stars, her cries echoing over the valley. Or she would straddle him in the throne room after court, riding him slow and deep while he gripped her hips hard enough to bruise, growling her name like a prayer. They were fated, they were whole, but power is a seductive poison, and some men forget the cost of miracles. Chapter 2. The First Crack. For 6 perfect months, the kingdom of Blackthorn basked in the glow of its restored king. Lysander's voice, deep, commanding, velvet rough, became the sound of law itself. When he spoke in council, advisors leaned forward as though the words might slip away if they didn't catch them. When he addressed the packs gathered in the courtyard, wolves dropped to one knee without being told, heads bowed in reverence. He walked taller, shoulders broader, the weight of silence finally lifted, and every night he came back to her, Seraphina, his Luna, his miracle. She would be waiting in their chambers, firelight dancing over her skin, and he would cross the room in 3 strides, lift her into his arms, and kiss her like a man drowning who had finally found air. Some nights were slow, lazy, lingering worship, his mouth mapping every inch of her until she trembled and begged. Other nights were wildfire. He'd pin her wrists above her head, thrust into her hard and deep, growling against her throat. You're mine, little moon. Only mine. She would arch beneath him, nails raking down his back, whispering his name like a prayer until they both shattered. He told her again and again that she had saved him. And for a while he believed it. But power has a way of whispering louder than gratitude. It started small, a lingering glance from a visiting alpha's daughter during a feast. The way an Omega servant's fingers brushed his when she poured his wine. The rush of knowing he could have them if he wanted. He was no longer the silent king begging for respect. He was the lichen who made the earth shake with one word. Females watched him with parted lips and lowered eyes. Males stepped aside. The world bent to him, and bending felt good. The first real fracture came after the Battle of the Northern Ridge. A rival pack had tested the borders, and Lysander led the charge himself. His roar, his actual roar, had scattered the enemy like leaves in a storm. When he returned victorious, blood-streaked and triumphant, the great hall erupted in cheers. Mead flowed. Drums thundered. Wolves howled his name until the rafters shook. Seraphina stood at the head table, glowing with pride, her hand resting lightly on the small swell of her belly that only they knew about yet. She had felt the quickening just days before, a secret flutter that made her smile, every time she thought of it. Lysander strode in, still in his battle leathers, eyes blazing. The crowd parted. He mounted the steps to the dais, pulled her into a fierce kiss that drew whoops and whistles, then turned to the hall and raised his fist. Tonight we feast. His voice boomed, rich and unchained. For Blackthorn! The roar that answered him was deafening. Later, after the speeches, after the toasts, he gave the council his first public address since the curse broke. He spoke of strength, of unity, of the goddess's favor returned. Every word landed like a hammer on steel. When he finished, the room exploded again. Advisors clasped his shoulders. Warriors wept openly. He was drunk on it, on them, on himself. That night, he took her on the war table. The council chamber was empty, maps still scattered across the heavy oak surface. Moonlight poured through the tall windows. Seraphina had come to find him, worried he was pushing too hard after the battle. She found him standing over the table, fingers tracing the borderlines, a slow smile on his face. "My king," she teased softly, closing the door behind her. "You should rest." He turned, eyes darkening as they raked over her. The simple emerald gown hugged her curves, the neckline dipping just low enough to make his blood heat. "Rest?" he murmured, voice low and dangerous. He crossed the room, cupped her face, and kissed her slow and deep. "How can I rest when you look like that?" She laughed against his mouth, but the laugh turned into a gasp as he lifted her onto the table's edge. Papers crumpled beneath her. His hand slid up her thighs, pushing the silk higher. "Lysander," she breathed, glancing toward the door. "Anyone could—" "Let them," he growled, nipping her bottom lip. "Let them hear how perfectly my Luna comes apart for her king." His fingers found her already wet, and he groaned against her neck. She clutched his shoulders as he freed himself, thick and hard, and thrust into her in one smooth stroke. The table rocked beneath them. Maps slid to the floor. He took her hard, one hand tangled in her hair, the other gripping her hip as he drove into her again and again. Her legs wrapped tight around his waist, urging him deeper. Every thrust sent sparks through the bond. Pleasure, possession, adoration. "You're my good luck charm," he rasped against her ear, pace relentless. "My voice, my crown, my everything. Because of you." She shattered first, crying out his name, inner walls clenching around him. He followed seconds later, burying himself deep and spilling with a guttural groan, her name a broken prayer on his lips. Afterward, he held her close, still inside her, forehead pressed to hers. Their breathing slowed together. "I love you," he whispered, voice rough with truth. "Never forget that." She smiled, cupping his face. "I never will." But even as he carried her to their bed later, even as he made love to her again, slower this time, reverent, she felt the tiniest thread of unease. He had been distant in small ways lately. Late nights reviewing battle plans, quick dismissals when she asked about his day, a new sharpness in his tone when she questioned minor decisions. She told herself it was the weight of rule. He was adjusting, they both were. The next morning she left at dawn to travel to a remote village where fever had broken out among the pups. Her healing gifts were needed, and she kissed him goodbye with a soft, "I'll be back in 3 days. Be good." He smirked, pulling her close for one last deep kiss. Always little moon. She believed him. 3 days later she was still miles away, hands deep in herbal poultices, when an Omega servant named Lyra was sent to the king's private chambers to deliver fresh linens. Lyra was young, barely 20, with honey blonde hair and wide amber eyes. She had always been efficient, quiet, respectful. She bowed low as she entered, arms full of folded sheets. Lysander was at his desk reviewing reports, shirt unbuttoned from the heat of the fire. He glanced up and paused. Lyra's gaze flicked to the open collar of his shirt, to the strong column of his throat, then quickly away. A flush crept up her neck. He noticed. For a long moment the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Lyra set the linens down, fingers trembling slightly. "Will there be anything else, my king?" Lysander leaned back in his chair, studying her. The way her pulse fluttered at her throat. The way she didn't quite meet his eyes. Power stirred in his blood again, dark, intoxicating. He opened his mouth to dismiss her. But he didn't. Instead he said, voice low, "Stay a moment." And Lyra, caught between fear and something far more dangerous, obeyed. Outside the chamber door the corridor was silent. Inside the first real crack widened, just enough for darkness to seep through. Chapter 3, Temptation's Whisper. The fire in the king's private chambers crackled low, throwing golden light across the stone walls and the heavy desk where Lysander sat. The stack of fresh linens lay forgotten on a side table. Lyra stood 3 paces away, hands clasped in front of her apron, eyes fixed on the floor. Lysander watched her. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. A king could look at his subjects, couldn't he? He had spent 32 years silent, invisible in his own way. Now people looked at him. Now they trembled when he spoke. Was it wrong to enjoy the way this girl's breath caught when his gaze lingered? "Closer," he said, voice low, testing the weight of the word. Lyra took one hesitant step. Then another. The scent of her fear mingled with something sweeter. Interest. Maybe even desire. Omegas were sensitive to power. It called to them like a drumbeat in the blood. He rose slowly, all 6.5 feet of him unfolding like a shadow come alive. The firelight carved sharp lines along his bare chest where the shirt hung open. He circled her once, slowly, the way a wolf circles prey it hasn't decided to kill yet. "You're shaking," he murmured, stopping behind her. Close enough that his breath stirred the fine hairs at her nape. I'm sorry, my king," she whispered. "I don't mean to." He reached out, one finger tracing the line of her jaw, tilting her chin up. Her skin was warm, soft, nothing like Serafina's silken strength, but new, different, forbidden. A voice in his head, his mate's voice, whispered, "Be good." He crushed it. "You're very beautiful, Lyra," he said, the words tasting like smoke and honey. Her eyes widened, amber catching the fire. "My king." He silenced her with a thumb against her lips. "No titles tonight." Then he kissed her. It was nothing like kissing Serafina. There was no bond, no golden fire racing through his veins, no soul-deep recognition. Just heat. Raw. Animal hunger. Lyra melted against him instantly, small hands clutching his shirt, a soft whimper escaping as he backed her against the desk. He told himself it was only a kiss, but his hands were already sliding under her skirt, gripping the soft flesh of her thighs, lifting her onto the edge of the desk. Papers scattered. An ink pot tipped, black spilling like blood across parchment. She gasped as he pressed between her legs, hard and insistent through his trousers. "My king, Lysander," she breathed, arching into him. The sound of his name on another female's lips sent a dark thrill through him. He growled low, teeth grazing her throat, marking her lightly, not enough to claim, just enough to bruise. His fingers found her slick and ready, and she cried out softly as he stroked her, slow and deliberate. He took her there on the desk, quick, rough, clothes barely pushed aside. She clung to him, nails digging into his shoulders, moaning into his neck as he thrust deep and fast, no tenderness, no whispered promises, just conquest. When it was over, he pulled away first, breathing hard, adjusting his clothes with steady hands. Lyra lay back against the scattered reports, chest heaving, eyes glazed with awe and spent pleasure. He looked down at her and felt nothing. No bond, no warmth, just the hollow echo of release. "Leave," he said quietly. She scrambled to obey, smoothing her skirts, bowing low as she backed toward the door. "Thank you, my king," she whispered, voice trembling with something between worship and fear. The door clicked shut behind her. Lysander stood alone in the firelight, the scent of sex and foreign perfume thick in the air. Guilt flickered, brief, sharp, like a blade between the ribs. Then entitlement smothered it. He was king. Kings took what they desired. Serafina would never know. She was miles away, healing pups, trusting him completely. One lapse didn't erase the miracle she'd given him. He poured himself a glass of wine, drank it down in one swallow, and went to bathe. 3 days later, Serafina returned. She came through the palace gates at dusk, travel cloak dusted with road dirt, exhaustion in her shoulders but joy in her eyes. The village had been saved, 20 pups pulled back from the brink by her hands and her herbs. She couldn't wait to tell him, couldn't wait to feel his arms around her, to share the secret of the life growing inside her when the moment was right. She found him in their chambers, freshly bathed, standing by the window watching the moon rise. He turned when she entered, and for a heartbeat his smile was real, warm, welcoming. "My little moon," he said, crossing the room to pull her into his arms. He kissed her deeply, hands sliding down her back, pressing her close. "I missed you." "I missed you too," she murmured against his lips, melting into him. The bond hummed between them, golden and alive. She buried her face in his neck, breathing him in, and froze. It was faint, barely there beneath the sharp scent of pine soap and his own skin, but unmistakable. Another female, Jasmine and something muskier, clinging to the collar of his shirt, lingering in his hair. Her stomach lurched. She pulled back slowly, searching his face. His gray eyes were steady, affectionate, nothing out of place. Serafina forced a smile. "You smell different." He laughed softly, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "I tried a new oil the servants brought from the south. Too strong?" She studied him for a long moment, heart beating too fast. The bond still sang. She would have felt true betrayal like a knife to the chest. This was small, a scent. Nothing more. She let him kiss her again. Let him undress her slowly by the fire. Let him lay her down on their bed and make love to her with a desperation that almost felt like apology. He was gentle tonight, reverent, kissing every inch of her skin, murmuring how much he'd missed her, how empty the palace had felt without her light. She came apart beneath him twice, tears pricking her eyes from the intensity of it, from the love that still burned so bright between them. Afterward, he held her close, one large hand splayed protectively over her belly, though he didn't know yet what lay beneath. "Tell me about the village," he whispered into her hair. She did. Voice soft, trusting. She fell asleep in his arms, believing the scent had been nothing. But deep in the night, when his breathing evened out, Serafina lay awake staring at the canopy above their bed. The bond hadn't broken, but for the first time it felt strained, like a single thread pulled too tight, and in the quiet darkness she wondered if miracles could be undone by mortal hands. Chapter 4: Silent Tears. The moon hung heavy and silver over Blackthorn Palace, bathing the corridors in cold light. In the royal chambers, Serafina lay on her side, one hand curled protectively over the slight curve of her belly, staring at nothing. 3 weeks had passed since her return from the village. 3 weeks of smiles that didn't reach her eyes. 3 weeks of Lysander coming to bed later and later, his skin carrying traces of jasmine, rose water, vanilla, never the same scent twice. 3 weeks of her pretending not to notice. She had tried to tell herself it was imagination at first, that the bond would have screamed if he had truly crossed the line. But the bond no longer screamed. It only ached, a dull, persistent throb, like a bruise pressed too often. Tonight he had come to her again. He had slipped into their bed long after midnight, the scent of another female still clinging to his skin beneath the hasty wash of soap. He had rolled toward her in the dark, arms strong and familiar, mouth finding her throat with practiced hunger. She had let him. She had even arched into his touch at first, desperate to feel the way they used to, desperate to drown the doubt in the heat they had always made so easily. He had taken her slowly this time, almost desperately, hands gripping her hips as though he could anchor himself inside her and forget everything else. He had whispered her name against her breast, voice ragged, thrusting deep and hard until she shattered around him with a broken sob she disguised as pleasure. Afterward, he had fallen asleep quickly, one arm draped possessively over her waist. She had lain awake until dawn, tears sliding silently into her pillow. Now morning light crept through the tall windows, pale and unforgiving. Lysander stirred beside her, stretching like a great cat, muscles flexing under scarred skin. He smiled when he saw her watching, slow, lazy, devastatingly handsome. "Good morning, little moon," he murmured, voice still rough from sleep. He leaned in to kiss her, but she turned her face at the last moment. His lips brushed her cheek instead. "I have early counsel," she said softly, slipping from the bed before he could pull her back. "The southern healers need supplies organized." He frowned, but only briefly. "Come back when you're done, I'll have the afternoon free." She nodded, already pulling on a robe, keeping her back to him so he wouldn't see the fresh tears threatening. By the time she reached her private solar, the door safely closed behind her, the tears came in earnest. Serafina sank to the floor in front of the hearth, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them as silent sobs shook her. She cried without sound. Years as a healer had taught her how to suffer quietly. She cried for the man who had once looked at her like she was the only star in his sky. She cried for the child growing inside her who deserved better than a father who smelled of other females. She cried because she still loved him so fiercely it felt like dying. When the storm passed, she wiped her face, stood and went to the basin to splash cold water on her eyes. In the polished bronze mirror, she looked pale but composed. She would not break in front of the court. She would not shame him or herself. That night, she began sleeping in the adjoining dressing chamber. She told him it was the pregnancy. Restless nights, strange dreams, not wanting to disturb him before important meetings. He accepted it without question, kissing her forehead and telling her to take care of herself and their pup. He did not notice that she stopped reaching for him in the dark. He did not notice that she no longer wore the delicate nightgowns he loved to peel off her. He did not notice that her smiles had become careful, practiced, perfect for banquets and audiences, hollow in private. Lysander, meanwhile, convinced himself everything was fine. The encounters grew bolder. A widowed beta from a visiting pack in the library after hours. A fierce warrior female in the armory, her strength matching his for one frantic, bruising clash against the weapon racks. Another Omega, different from Lyra, this time in the secluded royal gardens under moonlight. Each time he told himself it was harmless, a release, a perk of power he had been denied for too long. Serafina was pregnant now. She needed rest, not his constant demands. He was protecting her by seeking pleasure elsewhere. He came home smelling of sin and lied with kisses. And every time he took her, less often now but still with that desperate edge, he poured everything into making her feel cherished. He would spread her thighs and taste her until she cried out, then sink into her slowly, eyes locked on hers, whispering, "You're my Luna, my only queen." He would hold her afterward, murmuring plans for their pup, for the future. She let him believe it still worked. But inside, something precious was cracking, hairline fractures spreading with every lie. One night, after a grand feast celebrating the harvest moon, he returned later than usual. The palace was quiet, torches guttering low. Serafina sat by the window in her dressing chamber, wrapped in a thick robe, moonlight spilling across her lap. She had not gone to the feast. Exhaustion, she had said. Lysander entered their bedroom, slightly unsteady from mead, triumph still humming in his veins. The visiting Pax had sworn new oaths of loyalty. His voice had commanded the hall for hours. He found the bed empty and frowned. "Serafina?" She stepped through the connecting door, hair loose, face calm. "I was waiting for you," she said quietly. Something in her tone made him pause. But the mead and the high of the night dulled his edge. "Come to bed, love," he said, smiling as he began unbuckling his belt. "I've missed you." He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her deeply. She tasted like salt in sorrow, but he was too far gone to notice. His hands slid inside her robe, cupping her fuller breasts, thumbs brushing sensitive nipples. She gasped, half pleasure, half pain, and he took it as encouragement. He lifted her easily, carried her to their bed, and laid her down. The robe fell open, revealing the soft swell of her belly, the curve of hip and thigh bathed in silver light. "Goddess, you're beautiful," he growled, shedding his clothes and crawling over her. He took her hard that night, desperate, almost punishing, as though he could brand himself back into her soul. She clung to him, nails scoring his back, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes as he drove into her again and again. When she came, it was with a broken cry that sounded too much like grief. Afterward, he collapsed beside her, sated and heavy-limbed, pulling her close. "I love you," he murmured into her hair already drifting. Serafina lay still in his arms, staring at the ceiling. When his breathing deepened into sleep, she whispered into the dark, so softly that even wolf ears could not have caught it. "I know." The words hung in the silence like the first drop of rain before a storm. Outside, the moon watched, cold and knowing. And in the quiet of the palace, the Luna's heart broke a little more. Silently, completely, alone. Chapter 5. The Queen's Mask. The moon had turned its face away, leaving Blackthorn Palace wrapped in the heavy dark of a new moon night. In the royal wing, the corridors were silent, save for the distant crackle of torches and the occasional footfall of a guard. Serafina stood before the tall mirror in her dressing chamber, candlelight flickering over the elegant gown of deep sapphire silk that hugged her body like a lover's hands. The neckline plunged just enough to draw eyes, the fabric shimmering with tiny embroidered stars. Her auburn hair was swept up in an intricate crown braid, leaving her neck bare, the pale column of her throat marked faintly by the ghost of old love bites, his love bites, now faded to nothing. She looked every inch the untouchable Luna. No one would ever guess that inside she was hollow. She had perfected the mask. In the great hall at banquets and audiences, she smiled with warmth that reached her eyes just enough to convince. She listened to petitioners with patience, offered wise counsel beside her king, and laughed softly at the right moments. The court adored her more than ever, called her the gentle heart that tempered the Lichen King's storm. They never saw her alone. They never saw the way her hands trembled when she was finally behind closed doors. The way she pressed her palm to her chest as though she could physically hold her heart together. Lysander noticed nothing. He was too busy being king. His nights grew later, his excuses smoother. Border inspections, private meetings with allies, late training sessions with the warriors. He came to her less often now, and when he did, it was with a hunger that felt almost frantic, as if he could erase the taste of others by losing himself in her. She let him. because fighting would mean admitting it aloud, and she wasn't ready for the world to shatter yet. Tonight was the grand midsummer banquet. Ambassadors from every allied pack filled the great hall. Music, wine, the scent of roasted venison, and summer roses thick in the air. Lysander sat at the high table, devastating in formal black-silver crown glinting against his dark hair. He commanded the room without effort, voice rolling out like thunder as he toasted alliances and victories. Seraphina sat at his right, radiant, untouchable. She raised her goblet when he did, smiled when eyes turned to her, and applauded when the performers entered. Under the table, hidden by heavy damask cloth, his hand found her knee. She didn't flinch. His fingers slid higher, tracing slow circles on the inside of her thigh through the slit in her gown. Heat pooled low in her belly despite herself. Traitorous, conditioned response. She kept her face serene, nodding at something an ambassador said, even as Lysander's hand pushed higher, brushing the edge of lace between her legs. He leaned toward her under the pretense of refilling her wine, lips brushing her ear. "You're not wearing anything beneath this," he murmured, voice a low growl only she could hear. She turned her head slightly, lips curving in a perfect cool smile. A queen must be prepared for her king's whims. His eyes darkened with raw hunger. His fingers slipped beneath the lace, finding her already slick. Her body still knew him, still answered him, even when her heart screamed, no. He stroked her slowly, expertly, thumbs circling that sensitive spot until her breath hitched. She gripped her goblet tighter, knuckles white, forcing her expression to remain pleasant as she laughed at a jest from across the table. The music swelled. Dancers twirled. No one noticed the way her thighs tensed, the way her free hand dug into the armrest of her chair. Lysander watched her face with possessive satisfaction, fingers moving faster now, sliding inside her with deliberate precision. She bit the inside of her cheek to stay silent, pleasure and pain twisting together until she came apart right there at the high table, quiet, devastating. Tears burning behind her closed eyelids. He withdrew his hand slowly, brought his fingers to his lips under the guise of tasting the wine, and licked them clean while holding her gaze. "Good girl," he whispered. She smiled, beautiful, empty, and turned back to the ambassador as though nothing had happened. Later, when the feast finally wound down and the guests began to depart, he pulled her into a shadowed alcove off the main corridor. "I need you," he growled against her throat, already hard against her hip. "Now." She let him take her there. Quick, rough, her back against cold stone, gown rucked up around her waist. He thrust into her hard and fast, one hand over her mouth to muffle her cries, the other gripping her thigh to hold her open. It was over almost as soon as it began. He spilled inside her with a guttural groan, forehead pressed to hers, breathing ragged. "I love how you feel," he rasped. "How you take me." She said nothing, just rested her head against his shoulder until he pulled away and straightened their clothes. Back in their chambers, he fell asleep quickly, sated and content. Seraphina slipped from the bed, walked silently to her dressing chamber, and closed the door. Only then did she let the mask fall. She sank to the floor, back against the door, and cried, silent, wrenching sobs that tore from her chest without sound. She cried until her throat ached and her eyes burned, until there was nothing left but exhaustion. When dawn crept through the windows hours later, she rose, washed her face in cold water, and dressed for the day. In the mirror, the Luna stared back, flawless, composed, unbreakable. No one would ever know. But deep inside, something shifted. The pain was no longer just pain. It was fuel. She was done breaking alone in the dark. Chapter 6, Shattered Illusions. The fuel had been gathering for weeks, quiet, invisible, burning beneath the surface of Seraphina's perfect composure. She no longer cried in the dressing chamber. The tears had dried into something harder, colder. Resolve. She watched Lysander with new eyes now. Not the soft, loving gaze of the woman who had once healed a silent king with nothing more than faith and touch. These eyes were sharp, measuring. They saw the faint bruises on his collarbone that were not from training. They caught the way certain Omega servants lowered their gazes too quickly when he passed. They noted the hours he claimed were spent in council that no one else could verify. And still she said nothing. Not yet. The palace carried on in its glittering rhythm. Alliances strengthened, borders secured. The Lycan King's voice, the unbreakable law of the land. Seraphina stood beside him at every ceremony, every feast, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile a flawless shield. The court whispered how perfectly matched they were, The storm and the moon, power and grace. Only the moon knew how dark the storm had become. It finally broke on a night of pouring rain. Thunder rolled over the mountains like the goddess herself was raging. Lightning lit the palace in harsh white flashes. Lysander returned long after midnight, soaked through despite the cloaked carriage that had brought him to the private entrance. He smelled of rain and smoke and something sweeter, another female's perfume clinging stubbornly to his skin. Seraphina was waiting, not in bed, not in her dressing chamber. She stood in the center of their bedroom, clothed in a simple midnight gown, hair loose down her back like a river of fire. Candles burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Her face was calm, too calm. Lysander paused in the doorway, water dripping from his cloak onto the stone floor. "You're awake," he said, voice carrying that easy confidence he wore like armor now. He shrugged off the cloak, letting it fall. The storm delayed the return from the eastern outpost. Stop. One word, quiet, steady. He froze. Seraphina turned fully to face him, green eyes steady in the flickering light. "I know, Lysander." The air between them thickened. Thunder growled outside. He laughed, soft, disbelieving, and took a step forward. "Know what, little moon? You're tired. It's late. Come to bed." "I know about the others." Her voice didn't waver. "The Omegas, the Betas, the widows and warriors and anyone else who catches your eye when the mood strikes. I know you come back to me smelling of them. I know you lie with your mouth while you lie with them." His face changed, surprise first, then a flash of guilt quickly buried under indignation. "What are you accusing me of?" he demanded, voice deepening with the authority that bent entire packs to his will. "I am king. I have needs, duties." "Duties?" She echoed the word like it burned her tongue. "Is that what you call it? Duty to betray the one person who gave you back your voice? Duty to spit on the bond the goddess herself forged?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, towering over her, eyes blazing. "Watch your tone, Seraphina. You are my Luna. You do not speak to me this way." "I am your mate," she said, chin lifting, refusing to step back even as his presence pressed against her like a physical force. "Or I was. Until you decided I wasn't enough." Something dangerous flickered across his face. Anger, yes, but beneath it, shame. He reached for her arm. "You are everything." "Don't." She stepped back out of his reach. "Don't touch me with hands that touch them. Don't lie to my face when I can smell them on you." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Rain lashed the windows. Lysander's jaw clenched. "What do you want me to say, that I'm flawless? I'm a king, Seraphina. Power comes with the right to break what's sacred." Her voice cracked then, just once, raw hurt bleeding through the steel. "I waited for you. I believed in you. I gave you my heart, my body, my soul. And you threw it away for fleeting nights that mean nothing." His hands fisted at his sides. "They mean nothing. You are my Luna, my only—" "Stop saying that." The shout tore from her, echoing off the stone walls. Tears glittered in her eyes now, but they were angry tears, fierce, burning. "You don't get to say that anymore. You don't get to come back and pretend I'm still yours when you've been giving pieces of yourself away every night." He stared at her, chest rising and falling fast. For the first time since his voice returned, words seemed to fail him. Seraphina wrapped her arms around herself as though holding the broken pieces together. "I loved you when you had nothing," she whispered. "When you were silent and the world pitied you. I loved you then, and you waited until you had everything. Your voice, your crown, your power, to decide I was worth nothing." "Seraphina—" His voice cracked on her name, raw and desperate. "No." She shook her head, backing toward the door. "I'm done begging for scraps of the man I married." She turned and walked away, out of the bedroom, down the corridor, heels echoing like gunshots in the storm. Lysander stood frozen, rain still dripping from his hair, the scent of another female mocking him in the empty room. For the first time in months, hope, the fragile, beautiful hope she had carried for them, died inside her chest. She did not go to her dressing chamber. She went to the ancient temple wing, to the private altar of the moon goddess where only lunas were permitted after dark. The high priestess was waiting. She had sent word days ago, quietly, carefully. Seraphina knelt on the cold marble, moonlight spilling through the open roof, washing her in silver. "I need to know," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Is there a way to sever a mate bond that was never truly honored?" The priestess's eyes were ancient and kind and sorrowful all at once. "There is," she answered softly, "but it comes at a cost to both hearts." Serafina closed her eyes, feeling the last thread of the bond pull tight inside her chest, painful, beautiful, poisoned. "I'm ready to pay it," she whispered. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the temple, the Luna began to plan her freedom. Chapter 7. The Night of Reckoning. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the mountains washed clean and the air sharp with the scent of wet pine. Serafina did not return to the royal chambers. She spent the remaining hours of the night in the temple, kneeling on the cold marble until her knees ached, speaking quietly with the high priestess. Words of ritual, of cost, of irreversible choices. When she finally rose, the first pale light of morning touched her face and something in her expression had changed forever. The softness was gone. In its place burned a quiet, unyielding fire. She walked back through the palace corridors as the household began to stir, servants bowing low, guards straightening at her passage. None dared meet her eyes for long. Word had already begun to spread on whispers. The Luna had not slept in the king's bed. The king had risen alone, face thunder dark, voice sharp enough to cut stone. Lysander spent the day in a storm of his own making. Council meetings were terse. Advisors flinched at every word he spoke. Training in the yard was brutal. He drove the warriors until blood stained the ground, his commands ringing out harsher than necessary. He told himself it was anger at her accusations, at her defiance. But deep beneath the rage something else gnawed. Fear. Cold, unfamiliar, suffocating. By nightfall he could bear the palace no longer. He left under the guise of inspecting the outer watchtowers, taking only 2 trusted guards who knew better than to speak. But the carriage veered not toward the towers. It rolled toward the shadowed pleasure district on the edge of the city, a place kings were not supposed to go, where unmated wolves and wandering females gathered under red lanterns and the haze of spiced wine. He told himself he needed to clear his head. He told himself one night would dull the edge of her words. He told himself many things. The hours blurred. Wine that burned like fire, laughter that meant nothing, hands that reached for him with eager hunger, lips that whispered titles and praise. He lost count of the rooms, the faces, the scents. He let the noise drown out the memory of green eyes filled with accusation. He let bodies press against him until the bond in his chest felt distant, muted. This was power, he thought dimly at one point, sprawled across silk sheets while fingers traced the lines of his tattoos. This was what it meant to be whole, to take, to command, to never again be the silent king begging for scraps of respect. He did not think of her once, not until the first gray of pre-dawn found him stumbling back into the palace, cloak askew, hair disheveled, the mingled perfumes of the night clinging to his skin like smoke. The royal chambers were dark when he entered, save for a single candle burning on the mantel. He paused, swaying slightly, waiting for the familiar shape of her in the bed, the soft sound of her breathing. But the bed was empty, sheets untouched. Then he saw her. Serafina stood by the tall windows, bathed in the faint light of approaching dawn. She wore a simple gown of silver gray, hair loose and wild as though she had not slept either. Her back was to him, hands clasped in front of her, posture perfectly still. The sight of her, so composed, so distant, cut through the haze like a blade. "Serafina," he said, voice rough from drink and disuse through the night. He meant it to sound commanding, but it came out uncertain. She turned slowly. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed but dry. No tears now, only resolve, cold and absolute. "Where have you been?" she asked quietly. He opened his mouth to lie. Border Patrol, Emergency Council, anything. But the words died under the weight of her gaze. The scents on him were too strong, the evidence too plain. For the first time in months, shame rose sharp and bitter in his throat. "It doesn't matter," he said instead, drawing himself up. "I am king. I come and go as I please." A faint, sad smile touched her lips, gone as quickly as it came. "Yes," she said, "you have made that very clear." He took a step toward her, hands reaching. "Come to bed, little moon. We'll speak in the morning when—" "No." The single word stopped him cold. She lifted her chin, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady as the mountains themselves. "I accept your rejection of our bond, Lysander Voss. From this night forward, you are no longer my mate." The words were ritual, ancient, binding, irreversible, once spoken with true intent. The air in the room seemed to fracture. Pain lanced through his chest like silver through the heart, sharp, blinding, tearing a guttural sound from his throat. The bond, already strained to breaking, snapped with brutal finality. He staggered, one hand clutching at his chest as though he could physically hold it together. Serafina swayed but did not fall. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I reject you," she whispered again, softer this time, voice trembling with the weight of everything they had lost. "You are no longer mine." Lysander dropped to his knees, breath ragged, the room spinning around him. The emptiness where her warmth had lived for months yawned open like a chasm. Cold, endless, devastating. "Serafina," his voice broke on her name, raw and pleading. "Don't, please, I'm sorry." But she was already turning away, walking toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. "You taught me what I was worth to you," she said without looking back. "Now live with it." The door closed softly behind her. Lysander stayed on his knees in the growing light of dawn, alone in the vast chamber that suddenly felt like a tomb. For the first time since the curse had broken, his throat tightened with something worse than silence, and in the hollow space where her love had been, regret began to howl. Chapter 8. The Bond Breaks. Lysander remained on his knees long after the door closed behind her. The chamber was silent except for the faint drip of water from the storm gutters outside, and the ragged sound of his own breathing. Dawn crept across the floor in pale fingers of light, touching the rumpled bed, the fallen cloak, the empty space where she had stood. The pain was unlike anything he had ever known. Not the dull ache of his 32 silent years. Not the burn of battle wounds or the sting of silver. This was deeper, visceral, soul deep. The mate bond, once a golden thread woven through his chest, had been ripped away in one brutal severing. What remained was a raw, bleeding wound, an emptiness that echoed with every heartbeat. He pressed a fist to his sternum as if he could force the pieces back together. A low, broken sound escaped him, half growl, half sob. Serafina? Her name tasted like ash. He dragged himself to his feet, legs unsteady, and stumbled to the window. The kingdom stretched below, his kingdom, quiet in the early light. Smoke rose from village chimneys. Guards changed shifts on the walls. Life went on, indifferent to the fact that his world had just ended. He wanted to roar, to shatter the glass with the force of his anguish. But when he opened his mouth, only a hoarse rasp emerged. The first tendril of true fear curled in his gut. "No, not again." He tried again, forcing the words out. "Guards!" Nothing. Just a faint wheeze of air as though his throat had forgotten how to shape sound. The curse. It was returning. He had felt it the moment the bond snapped. The subtle tightening in his vocal cords, the faint rasp at the edges of his voice when he had begged her name. Now it was worsening by the minute. He staggered to the mirror above the hearth and stared at his reflection. The powerful lichen king, broad, scarred, crowned, looked back with wild, haunted eyes. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Panic clawed at him. He gripped the mantle until the wood groaned. This could not be happening. He had been whole. He had been feared. He had been everything his bloodline was meant to be. And in one night of arrogance, he had thrown it all away. Memories assaulted him without mercy. Serafina walking into the solstice hall, moonlight in her eyes, her hand over his heart the night she first said, "I see you." Their wedding night, his voice breaking free like thunder the way she had wept with joy against his lips. The quiet mornings when she traced his tattoos and whispered that he was her home. He had taken that light and smothered it for fleeting shadows. Regret crashed over him in waves, each one heavier than the last. He sank into the chair by the dying fire, head in his hands. He stayed there for hours. Servants knocked and retreated when no answer came. Advisors sent word of urgent matters and received only written notes in a guard's hand. The king is indisposed. By midday, the rasp in his throat had faded to complete silence. He tested it again and again alone in the vast chamber, whispering, shouting inside his head, willing the sound to come. Nothing. The curse had reclaimed him, swift and merciless, as though the moon goddess herself had watched the bond break and judged him unworthy of the gift Serafina had returned. He deserved it. That truth settled into his bones like ice. He deserved every second of this emptiness. Word spread slowly through the palace at first. Whispers among the staff, uncertain glances in the corridors. The king had not spoken since dawn. The Luna had not been seen. By evening, the court was restless. Serafina had not hidden herself. She moved through her duties with the same grace as always, visiting the healer's wing, reviewing stores for winter, meeting with the priestesses. But those who dared look closely saw the change, the set of her shoulders, the cool distance in her once warm eyes, the way she no longer wore the silver moon pendant he had given her on their mating night. She did not weep in public, she did not rage. She simply carried on, as though a part of her had not died with the bond. In the late afternoon, she stood on the high balcony overlooking the training yard. Below, warriors drilled under the watchful eye of the captain. Once, Lysander would have been there, voice booming corrections, presence commanding instant respect. Today, the captain glanced up nervously toward the royal wing as if waiting for orders that never came. Serafina watched for a long moment, then turned away. The pain of the severed bond still throbbed in her chest, a constant dull ache that flared with every breath. She had known it would hurt. The priestess had warned her. But nothing had prepared her for the hollowness, the way the world felt muted, colors less vivid, air harder to draw. Yet beneath the pain was something new, relief, freedom. For the first time in months, no foreign scents lingered in her bed. No lies waited in the dark. She was no longer tethered to a man who had chosen to destroy what they had. She placed a hand over her heart and whispered to the empty air, "I am enough." Night fell. Lysander stood at the door of the temple wing, forbidden to males without invitation. But desperation overrode tradition. The guards had let him pass. None dared deny their silent king. He found her in the moonlit atrium, kneeling before the ancient statue of the goddess. Silver light poured through the open roof, bathing her in ethereal glow. She did not turn when his footsteps echoed on the marble. He stopped a few paces behind her, throat working uselessly. He had no voice to beg, no words to undo what he had done. He could only stand there, a king reduced to silence once more, watching the only woman he had ever loved pray to the deity who had judged him. Serafina rose slowly, smoothing her gown. When she finally faced him, her expression was calm, devastatingly so. His eyes pleaded. He took one step forward, hands open, imploring. She shook her head. "I felt it break," she said quietly. "The bond. I felt you lose your voice again the instant it snapped. The goddess has spoken, Lysander. Your punishment is your own." He shook his head violently, mouthing her name, desperation raw on his face. "I know you're sorry," she continued, voice steady. "I can see it. But sorry doesn't mend what you shattered. You taught me my worth when you chose others over me night after night. Now I choose myself." A single tear slipped down his cheek, the proud lichen king weeping silently. Serafina's own eyes glistened, but she did not waver. "Goodbye, Lysander." She walked past him without touching, without looking back. He watched her go, the vast atrium swallowing her footsteps until he was alone beneath the indifferent moon. And in the silence that was now his prison once more, the full weight of his loss finally crushed him. Chapter 9. Ashes of a King. Lysander did not leave the atrium. He sank to the cold marble where Serafina had left him, back against the base of the moon goddess's statue, and remained there until the silver light faded into morning. Guards found him at dawn, curled like a broken beast, eyes open but seeing nothing. They did not dare touch him. They simply stood watch until he finally rose, silent and hollow-eyed, and walked back to the royal wing like a ghost haunting his own palace. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. The court whispered at first, then spoke openly. The king had lost his voice again. Decrees came only in writing, sharp and curt, delivered by trembling advisors. Audiences were shortened or cancelled. The once thunderous presence that had filled every room now felt distant, muted as though a shadow had settled over the throne. Packs on the borders grew restless. Whispers of weakness spread like frost across the kingdom. Challengers began to circle, young alphas from distant clans, sensing blood in the water. Lysander felt none of it. He moved through the palace like a man underwater. Meals were left untouched. Sleep came only in fits, haunted by dreams of green eyes and auburn hair, of a smile that had once been his salvation. He would wake gasping, hand pressed to his silent throat, the emptiness in his chest a living thing that devoured him from the inside. He tried to find her, not to beg. He knew begging would only drive her further away, but simply to see her, to know she still breathed the same air. Servants reported that the Luna kept to her own wing now, a suite far from the royal chambers. She received visitors, healers, priestesses, trusted advisors. She walked the gardens at dawn. She oversaw preparations for the coming winter with calm efficiency. She was thriving, and he was dying. One evening, driven by a desperation he could no longer name, he went to her new quarters. The guards at her door, her guards now, loyal to the Luna above all, lowered their eyes but did not move aside. He wrote on a scrap of parchment, "Please, just let me see her." The senior guard took it, disappeared inside, and returned moments later. "The Luna is not receiving visitors, my king," he said softly. "Especially not you." Lysander stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door as though he could will it open. Then he turned and walked away. That night, for the first time since the bond broke, he dreamed of her. Not the painful memories that usually tormented him, but something softer, warmer. In the dream, they were back in the temple on their wedding night. Moonlight poured over them. She stood before him in white silk, eyes shining with tears of joy as his voice broke free for the first time. "I take you, Seraphina Vale, as my mate, my Luna, my forever?" She smiled, radiant, trusting, and rose to kiss him. Her hands framed his face, gentle and sure. "You gave me a home," she whispered. He reached for her, arms desperate to hold, to keep. But she dissolved like mist in sunlight, leaving only the echo of her laughter and the crushing weight of emptiness. He woke with her name on his silent lips and tears on his face. The next morning, a messenger arrived from the eastern border. A minor lord had declared open challenge for the throne. Not war, not yet, but a formal trial of strength to be held at the next full moon. Others would follow if Lysander refused or lost. The council begged for guidance. Lysander wrote a single line: "Prepare the arena." He would fight. He would bleed. He would prove he was still king, even without a voice, even without her. But in the quiet moments when no eyes watched, he admitted the truth to himself. He did not care about the throne anymore. He cared only that she was gone. Seraphina, meanwhile, was making plans. She stood in her solar, maps, and ledgers spread across the table, packing crates lining the walls. Her most trusted advisor, an elderly she-wolf named Myron, watched with quiet sorrow. "You are certain, child?" Myron asked. "The northern packs would welcome you. The priestesses have offered sanctuary. But once you leave Blackthorn lands—" "I know," Seraphina said, folding a cloak with steady hands. "But I cannot heal here. Every stone in this palace carries his scent. Every hall echoes with what we lost. I need distance. I need to breathe." Myron nodded, eyes soft. "And when he discovers you're gone?" Seraphina paused, a flicker of old pain crossing her face. "He will survive. He is king. Kings always do." But even as she said it, her hand drifted unconsciously to her chest where the severed bond still ached like a bruise that would never fade. She had heard the rumors. Challengers rising, the kingdom unsteady. Part of her, the part that had once loved him beyond reason, worried. The rest of her, the part that had learned to choose herself, refused to look back. On the final night before her planned departure, she walked the high battlements alone. The wind whipped her cloak around her ankles, carrying the scent of snow from the mountains. Below, the palace lights glowed like scattered stars. She did not hear him approach. His steps were silent now, deliberate, but she felt the shift in the air. She turned. Lysander stood 10 paces away, cloaked in black, face half-shadowed by the hood. He looked thinner, eyes haunted, the proud lines of his face etched deeper with suffering. For a long moment they simply stared at each other across the stone walkway. Then he reached into his cloak and drew out a small velvet pouch. He opened it and held out his hand. In his palm lay the silver moon pendant he had given her on their mating night, the one she had stopped wearing the day she learned the truth. His eyes pleaded. He took one step forward, then another, until he stood close enough to touch. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the pendant toward her throat. Seraphina did not move. He fastened it around her neck with trembling fingers, the cool metal settling against her skin like a memory. When he stepped back, his lips formed a single word she could read even in the dark. "Stay." Her throat tightened. For one heartbeat, the old love surged, powerful, aching, tempting. Then she reached up, unclasped the pendant, and placed it gently back into his hand. "No," she said softly. "I can't." His face crumpled. He shook his head, mouthing her name over and over, desperation raw and bleeding. "I'm leaving at dawn," she told him. "Do not follow me. Do not send anyone. Let me go, Lysander. It's the only mercy left between us." She walked past him, the wind carrying her scent. jasmine and wildflowers back to him one last time. He did not stop her. He stood on the battlements long after she was gone, the pendant clenched in his fist until the metal cut his palm. And when the first snow of winter began to fall, silent and merciless, the Lichen King finally understood the true depth of the curse. Not the silence, but the loss of the one soul who had ever made him whole. Far below in the stables, Seraphina mounted her horse, cloak wrapped tight against the cold. She did not look back. Chapter 10: The Price of Salvation. Snow fell thick and silent over Blackthorn Palace, blanketing the courtyards in white and muffling the world to a hush. Seraphina rode out just before dawn, her horse's hooves barely making a sound on the fresh powder. A small escort of loyal guards flanked her, wolves who had served the Luna long before the king claimed her heart. No banners flew, no trumpets sounded. She left as quietly as mist burning off under the rising sun. She did not look back once. By the time the palace stirred to full life, she was already miles into the foothills, the jagged peaks swallowing her silhouette. The northern packs waited beyond, sanctuary, a new beginning, a place where no one would speak his name in her presence unless she allowed it. Freedom tasted like cold air and pine, sharp and clean in her lungs. Back at the palace, chaos erupted when her absence was discovered. A maid found the royal chambers empty, the Luna's wing stripped of personal belongings. Word raced through the corridors like wildfire. Advisors burst into the throne room, voices overlapping in panic. "She's gone, Your Majesty. The northern border reports no sign of her caravan. Whispers are spreading she has rejected the crown itself." Lysander stood at the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered valley, the silver moon pendant still clenched in his fist from the night before. The metal had warmed against his skin.